Welcome. This is Chewing the Gristle, a poetry chat with Tim Conroy and Al Black. And our guest today is the award winning poet and artist, Betsy Thorne. Betsy Thorne is a South Carolina poet and artist and is one of 6 generations to call Columbia home. She she has been publishing for quite some time and winning awards in different journals throughout the Southeast. And this is her first book. And her first book is called Measured Words, and it is on Main Street Rag, and you can get it at the Main Street Rag bookstore. Welcome, Betsy.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me as your guest today.
Wonderful. You've been publishing in journals for a number of years, but this is your first book. Tell us about your journey to publishing your first book.
I love to write, and I wrote poems when I was really young in grade school. But life gets in the way and comes in between, and so I didn't write for a good number of years. But then I'd say about 25 years ago, things started happening. My father started exhibiting first signs of dementia, and our son enlisted in the South Carolina Army National Guard about a year before 9/11 happened. So I just found that I needed to start trying to feel how I was thinking about things, and writing really helped me with that process of dealing with life changes.
Hey, Betsy, tell us a little bit about the poems in the book.
Okay. Probably the first one I wrote was about our son. He pulled a fast one and enlisted while I was away at a writers and artist retreat. And that's one of the earliest poems, the oldest poems that's in the book. So all the poems that are in the book have kind of the common thread of almost like moments that I experienced through the years, dealing with the issues of my father going into dementia more and more. And then our son, he was deployed 4 different times. He's retired now. But yes, they all evolved out of just, life experience, like most writing is.
Well, tell us a little bit about the process that you use as a poet.
I have to say I'm not disciplined like Eudora Welty was. I think she said, I read where she sat at her desk for so many hours a day, whether she wrote one word or nothing came. But if an idea did come, she was there to capture it and start writing. I'm not that disciplined. I guess I'll usually take a walk first, or and always I read poems by other poets, just kind of to get my mind in gear for writing. And usually it's either a line that's come to me, or a moment that I'm either remembering or just recently experienced. And sometimes I'll actually wake up with almost a poem ready to go on the page, at least an idea of what I want to write.
So it sounds like you do a lot of sort of reflection before you. So that's great, for the emerging poet to listen and hear. How, what advice would you give to a poet of any age starting out, dealing with rejection, dealing with the process and the frustration of getting better?
Well, that's a multi-layered question there. I would say that just starting out, to read, not just poems, but all kinds of literature. you know, it makes you comfortable with language, and it's so helpful to see what other writers, how they use language and how they can communicate, and with poetry to study their forms and their word choice. But for somebody just starting to write, I think it was Wordsworth that said, fill the page with the breathings of your heart. Just start writing. And the time will come where you will start chipping away and forming it, let the poem kind of find the form it wants to take. And just start playing with it almost. Word choice is so important. I love to do research. So looking for that right word or that turn of phrase.
That's great advice. Betsy, how'd you get your title for your book?
It wasn't the working title for years. In fact, I think the working title, the first one was what the years bring. But then a poem that falls almost dead center in the book has those words in it, measured words. It's when my son enlisted, and I had gone to the artist retreat, and my husband called, and that was how I found out. He told me while I was there. And so I was thinking that he was calling to tell me something funny, or I was going to tell him something funny that had happened while I was there. But instead, I listened to his measured words of him telling me that our son had enlisted. And I thought, that's what the book needs to be called, because it has so many meanings to me, and measured words, word choice. And the words you string together to communicate with people, to form images, to try to find that maybe universal appeal. So it just seemed like it named itself.
Let's hear some poems.
Okay.
That'd be wonderful.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the very first poem in the book, and it's called On a Photo from South Carolina Lowcountry. E. Burson Photograph Collection, Untitled Photograph, circa 1915. The boy obliged the request, paused in his duties to pose outside the railway depot. He looked sharp in knee breeches, coat and tie, a porter's hat squarely on his head. He knelt in the dry dirt, his dog tucked under one arm. It struggled, but the boy, unfazed, held still, all details of his face caught. Against the dark clothes and skin, the dog glows ghost-like, dead center, a blur in time. I chose that picture. It just spoke to me so much. And that the blur in time, so much of life to me is like that in moments. So anyway, I felt like it was a good opening poem for the rest of the poems in the book. My father tomorrow would have turned 100 years old. And I learned so much from him about language and poetry. And I've got the book here that he gave my mother on her 20th birthday. It's a really old book of poetry, and my first exposure, really. And Daddy remembered things and would recite from memory, and which I would tell young writers or all people that are interested in the craft of poetry. If a poem finds you, if it speaks to you, memorize it. It's a wonderful thing to possess a poem, because you can always have it, just like you can appreciate a painting on the wall. If you have a poem in your memory, you can always access it. Okay, the next poem I'm going to read is called The Sycamore Tree. And my grandfather had built a boarding house on Sumter Street, and it's where my father grew up. The Sycamore Tree. A boarding house no longer stands at 1812 Sumter. My grandfather built it, filled it with family, city workers, county clerks. On the front lawn, he trained wisteria to grow like small trees. When I was a child, the widow, Daisy Dreyer, occupied a corner room. Come Christmas, she knitted a hat for me, a sweater for my doll. Now all that's left is a dirt lot and a sycamore besieged by age. In strong wind, its limbs click together like knitting needles. Can you hear them?
That's lovely. I love that.
Thank you. True. It might have been that a boy of 10 shadowed an older brother prone to drunken trouble through alleyways to shepherd him home to bed pre-dawn. Norfolk Southern on the rails, hoot owls in the hickories. A pittance of sleep to wake by the shake of his dad's hand. You'll be late for school, son. Paused outside the kitchen in the icy dog trot hall, steam billowing from stove top, sheen on Ernestine's ebony skin. Callie with the wide-brimmed serving bowl earned fills with grits. Mother turned aside at the sink to shoot insulin in her thigh. The scrape of chairs on oak floor, boarders sitting down to eggs, stewed apples, then out the door, ham biscuit in his fist, gone cold as the winter street.
Hey, Betsy, before I turn this over to Al to ask a question, I was going to ask you in terms of your process for ordering your poems, because there seems to be such a great order to your collection.
You know, what I did, I cleared the dining room table. I've got a long dining room table that I'm sitting at right now, one end. I laid all the poems out, and I just kind of tried to find almost a story line. Although you could pick up and read the last poem in the book if you wanted to. It doesn't have to be in chronological order. But I did want the poems to speak to one another. So yeah, I spent a long time doing that. And I also had help with that from my wonderful friend, Ed Madden. He also—
Ed's a master at that. He is
Oh, yes, yeah.
And Al and I both had Ed as an editor. So, we had that experience of his help with ordering the collection. The Sycamore Tree and True work as perfect companion poems.
Yes.
Al, I'm going to turn it over to you for a question.
Okay. So, did you, and you've answered part of this about having established poets help edit and give advice, but in having that experience, how did the process work for you, and who were your poetic influences?
Music comes to mind, but not the music you might think of. Music to me was the voices, beloved voices on the porch on a summer evening, in conversation. And the singing of my grandfather and father and uncles. Anytime they would gather, they would be singing Down by the Riverside or Carolina Moon. And then, of course, the King James Version of the Bible. Being in church as a child, hearing the hymns and the Bible verses, I didn't know to call it majestic, but something stirred in me at that early age that the love of language, I think, developed early. And as I said, my father was a storyteller. His mother was a storyteller and recited in churches throughout the Southeast when she was a young woman. And she also could tell funny stories too. But yes, so my love of poetry is rooted in storytelling and the music of voices.
Okay. So how much time do you spend on revision, and when did you know this book was finished?
Oh, I spend a lot more time revising than I write. Originally, the poem. And, you know, some poems, you write them and you just know that they're ready, but so many of them, they're almost like those green berries that are starting to form right now on the dogwood trees. You just know they're green. And when they turn red and the squirrels jump on them, they're ready for consumption. You kind of feel that about poems. And also get feedback from your writer friends.
Well, that was a wonderful description of them being ripe on a dogwood tree. I'm going to let from here, Tim. Tim. You have another question?
Let's let Betsy read a couple more poems right now.
Okay.
Juice glass, jelly jar glass. My son, the man, after Sharon Olds. I cannot imagine him no longer a child. It seems no time since he delayed his entrance into the world the way Houdini, bound and submerged, would hold out beyond reason before he'd snap the padlocks and break the surface. It seems no time since I would bathe him, zip him up in his sleeper, lay him in his crib. Too soon he would escape. Then I'd hear the swish of his diaper as he made his way down the hall to my room. By what trick does he appear to grow before my eyes? Now he smiles at me the way Houdini smiled, then swirled his cape and vanished into thin air.
That's gorgeous.
Oh, thank you. It's so true. They grow so fast, and then they're old and you're older. So,
Hey, Betsy, in terms of craft, you know, what are some of the poetic elements that you tend to sort of lean on and like to infuse into your poetry?
well, my ear is topmost. I think it was Mark Twain that said the Southerner talks music. So when I write, it's always quiet. I have to have quiet so I can hear the music of language in my head. And image is of great importance to me. I am a visual artist as well. I paint those sister arts of poetry and painting. So when I write, it's very visual to me. I hear it, I see it, and I'm trying to get it across in as few words as possible. So word choice is extremely important. And the turn of line, the end of lines, the rhyme, rhythm, building energy in a poem, and the last lines need to really resonate and be strong, I think.
Betsy, how does an emerging poet get better? What advice would you give to somebody who's trying to get better?
Trying to get better. I think your brother's teacher, Gene Norris, didn't he say, don't gild the lily? Yeah. Cut out as many adjectives and adverbs, articles even, as you can. And kill the darlings. Sometimes you just have to, it might be a great line or a passage, but it might not be adding to the poem in any significant way. So sometimes you have to get rid of things that are just so lovely, but they're not working. They're not carrying the load.
That's so true. How about reading another poem for us?
Okay. This one's called The Moment. While a worker rotated my tires, I waited inside a dim garage, 3 steps from the light of day. Across the street, a small brick house baked in full sun. Its white roof wavered in the heat. Behind it, another roof, then the steeple of a sad church with red glass windows. Not a bird, not even a cloud was in sight, but a man on a silver bike passed, and a black couple pushed a stroller across 4 lanes of traffic. They waved to an old man sitting in shadow beside the house. All of that I wrote in a letter to my boy, a slice of home. I wished to send more, reassurance that things are as he left them. It isn't true. The man I saw sitting in shadow has deserted his post, leaving his chair tipped against the house, striding away on ground that has never known landmines. Last week, I sent a package with books and CDs, but no strawberry cake. Today, while my tires were rotated, I watched the red hand sweep the moment when somewhere in Bosnia, a soldier from South Carolina, my only son, turned 21.
That's wonderful. Very poignant. And that actually moves us to the a very interesting question, at least for me. What advice would you give to an emerging poet about the inclusion of their interests and passion in their poetry?
Well, I think what you experience in life, it's your feelings and your emotions and what resonates with you. You might be surprised that they're universal. They're going to resonate with other people too. And just to write about it, do an outpouring, and then start thinking, what is it you really want from this poem? What do you want it to accomplish, to do? And then start whittling away and trying to get to that essence of what you expect from it, what you're trying to relate to other people with and to yourself. What did Frost say? A poem should begin in delight and end in wisdom. So just, I go back to saying read, though. I became a much better poet when I started hitting every book I could about other people's writings and reading, just reading. It's hard to do, you kind of want to jump in there and start writing, getting on that horse and riding, but it takes a while to get to that point that you can go jump all the hurdles. So,
it comes to, the question when you read a lot of poetry, for you, what makes a good poem?
oh, that when I read it, I can hardly get it out of my head. where I take it into myself. Where the language has been used so sparingly, but extraordinarily, that it just, I think, man, I wish I had written that. I wish that was my poem.
That's exactly the feeling you get, utter jealousy.
Yeah, that's true.
But tell us what you're working on now and how people can get hold of your books.
Oh, okay.
Of your book.
Well, what's going on in the world right now with COVID and everybody being isolated, I've been writing a lot of poems about that. Ed Madden spent some time over in Brazil before Christmas last year and writing. And he talked about the clock of the body and the clock of time. And my poems are the clock of isolation. In fact, one of them is titled that. But before I share that one poem that I'd like to close with, I'd like to read the last poem in the book, if I may. It's Welcoming a Stranger. Would that be okay?
It'd be wonderful. That'd be wonderful.
Okay. Welcoming a Stranger. When the Jehovah's came knocking, Mama always went to the door, but politely declined the proffered pamphlet. She was a Methodist beyond sway. It was different with the Mormon boys who arrived in tandem, wearing white shirts, black ties, and pants. She warmed to the Latter-day Saints, just boys, she'd say, far from home. She invited them in to sit on the porch, listened as they espoused their faith. Witnesses and saints rarely ring my bell. I confess I do not answer if they do. When our son returned from Iraq, per his wishes, only his wife, his father, and I, and a few army buddies gathered to welcome him. No fanfare. War had not been kind. As we waited on the concourse, I saw two boys dressed in the telltale clothes, white shirts, black ties, and pants. How young they looked and lost. I thought to offer direction, but caught sight of a soldier, some other mother's son. My eyes flicked past him, searching, but a lift of his hand brought me back to him, closer now and clearly my own.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful poem. And before you read your last one, I have a request. I love the poem in your book, Turmoil. Could you read that poem?
Yes, I will. Yeah. When I gave Ed Madden all my poems, he wrote to me and he said, I feel like we need a transition poem. And this is what I came up with. So it's near the center of the book, and it's called Turmoil. In the Alzheimer's ward for veterans, my father shares a room with Red, a decorated World War II pilot. Model planes hang from the ceiling above his bed. He's not aware of them, nor of my father. Unlike Red, my father still talks. He believes he's a student again at Clemson Military College and says his roommate is a bit on the quiet side, but otherwise finds no fault. My father no longer recites Tennyson by heart, no longer looks to a dictionary for enlightenment. When seated, he still crosses his arms over his chest, but not always left over right. In his mind, my mother is at the salon and we'll be back soon. His fall from mindfulness crushes me. I need to believe he is, as he now seems, content. Only once have I seen him anxious. For a moment last year, he looked about, stirred the air with his hands, and said, turmoil.
Thank you, Betsy. I love that poem. Thank you.
Yes.
And I think do you have one more for us, or is that, was that?
Whoa.
Yes. I thought you were going to end with another poem.
Oh, if we have time. So this is the poem that I've been writing, one of the poems I've been writing during this awful, strange time of the world. It's called The Clock of Isolation for Ed. Day 10, I wake with wild hair, wet it down, go to the kitchen and wait, cup in hand, for coffee to brew. I put on rouge and lipstick, two things I shunned as a teen, though Mama begged, please, won't you? I slip on the diamond ring Daddy gave her, the one I toyed with in church, kaleidoscopic colors of Christ glinting from facets. Rain ended during the night, morning light dazzles. On the porch, I wipe away damp pollen as the postman walks by, wearing earpods and blue plastic gloves. Nothing for me, not even junk mail. Then a letter caught in wicker catches my eye, dropped by my husband as he gathered himself to come in yesterday or the day before or the day before. I know the handwriting. Sit to read the holiday note, all the better for having come late or coming now. My poet friend, home after 2 months in Brazil by the sea, brings to life his life there, peppered with Portuguese, writes about time and landscapes and memory and change, that time is a malleable and precious thing, that now is where we live. He closes, stay safe and well. Rooted here in this hour, if I close my eyes, I can see the small owl that flew by his window every day at dusk.
That's awesome. That's a great piece.
And I didn't catch at the time I read your book that you were writing about Ed. But
This is
then,
a new poem.
oh, it's a new poem. I was going to say,
That I've
because I'm
been
thinking,
writing.
I didn't catch that there was a book, poem in your book about that.
Well, there's a lot of Ed because by that time I had done some independent study with Ed. I was fortunate enough to get to do that. And so he's in my head. But this poem I wrote recently during this COVID stuff.
Oh, okay.
First started.
I was listening and going, I don't remember that. I don't remember that poem. But we really want to thank you for coming on and allowing us to interview you and hear your poetry and record this so that other people in the poetry world can profit not only from your poetry but from your journey as a poet and to having your first book, which is Measured Words, and it is available at Main Street Rag Bookstore. We encourage folks to buy this book and to support not only this poet, our friend Betsy Thorne, but also please, if you could, support those independent booksellers and publishers, because in this time of pandemic, they need our support. Betsy, thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I leave your audience with just one little thought?
Please do.
Begin doing what you want to do now. This is my favorite quote from Francis Bacon, who English philosopher, died in the 1600s, but what he had to say here is so important today and forever. Begin doing what you want to do now. We are not living in eternity. We have only this moment, sparkling like a star in our hand and melting like a snowflake.